G'day, eh? My name's RJ, and welcome to Killer Canuck, a recurring segment here on RUE MORGUE TV. I'd like to take a dive into Canadian horror, how it started, how it's grown, where it is today. Canada's horror film industry really picked up steam in 1975, thanks in no small part to Canada's own Baron of Blood. And though his name sends chills down the spines of millions today, that skin-crawling feeling had to start somewhere. Let's take a look at his first feature, 1975's Shivers. In the 1970s, Canada's film industry was still feeling the effects of John Grierson's suppressive influence. If you weren't making a documentary, you likely were making a feature cleverly disguised as one. Our Toronto-born filmmaker said at the time that there was no filmmaking of the imagination, and so he was going to change that. Born in 1943 to a journalist and a classical pianist, David Cronenberg enrolled at the University of Toronto for science, and re-enrolled the following year for Honours English, thinking that he was to be a novelist. It was here that he saw a fellow student's feature film, Winter Kept Us Warm. He notes this viewing as a turning point in his life, one that would guide him towards filmmaking. He made two short films titled Transfer and From the Drain, made for under $500 each, and with Cronenberg performing almost all of the crew duties. He took a year off and traveled Europe, staying in Copenhagen and London. When he returned to Canada, he took a 2-year general BA and graduated. Around this time, he started to make a pair of avant-garde films, Stereo and Crimes of the Future. He never pursued his master's. He didn't see a point. He was going to make movies. After Crimes and Stereo, Cronenberg took another year off and traveled France. He shot some short filler pieces for the CBC, but had some difficulty finding consistent film work. He went to the Cannes Film Festival and reluctantly convinced himself that if he wanted to be a real filmmaker, he couldn't just make avant-garde films like his two previous works. He returned to Toronto and wrote a script that at the time he titled Orgy of the Blood Parasites. With this script in hand, Cronenberg began to search for a feature film industry in Canada, and this is where he felt John Grierson's legacy. He dug a little deeper and eventually found Cinepix, run by John Dunning and Andre Link. Cinepix was essentially Canada's answer to Roger Corman's New World Pictures. They were distributing what they called nudie cuties, which were ultimately French softcore comedies. They sold well in Quebec, Cinepix was headquartered in Montreal, but they never held a foothold in the US market where all the money was. Cronenberg showed John Dunning Stereo and Crimes of the Future in a bid to direct one of their softcore movies. He was interested, but the job eventually went to John Stone. Cronenberg then showed Dunning his script for Orgy of the Blood Parasites, and interest turned to action. At first confused by why this script had no castles or vampires in it, Cinepix saw a low-budget horror movie as a way to finally distribute to their southern neighbors, whose B-movie houses like New World and American International were thriving. They told Cronenberg they would buy the script from him, but he steadfastly responded that they would only have it if he could direct. Cinepix brought the script to the Canadian Film Development Corporation, which would eventually become Telefilm Canada, looking for some extra funding to produce the movie. The CFDC at that time was already under attack by conservative columnists for helping produce Cinepix's other films, and were reluctant to hand out funding to a horror movie, particularly one fronted by a rookie director. It would take them 3 years to finally agree to fund the picture. Disheartened, Cronenberg decided to search for alternatives during this time. He flew to LA with his good friend Norm Snyder, who would eventually co-write Dead Ringers with him, and visited some B-movie distribution houses there. He stayed with Lorne Michaels, the Canadian creator of Saturday Night Live, and visited New World Pictures. There he met with John Davidson, who would go on to produce Joe Dante's Piranha and Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop, among others, and Davidson told him that he would be happy to produce Orgy of the Blood Parasites, though Cronenberg was still reluctant to leave Canada. He zipped from party to party looking for producers, and it's here that he came across Jonathan Demme, the future director of The Silence of the Lambs, who was staying at horror icon Barbara Steele's beach house. He had just directed her in Caged Heat. Cronenberg talked to Demme about his script and was shocked to find out that not only had he already read it, but Cinepix had offered him a job to direct. Furious, Cronenberg returned to Canada, but when he got there, he was greeted with the news that the CFDC had finally agreed to fund his movie, and even better, with him in the director's chair. With the extra funding, the budget rounded out to just under $180,000, which was low even for then, and a 15-day shooting schedule was agreed upon, though they would also have 2 pickup days. It wasn't until his first production meeting that it really started to sink in for Cronenberg. The definition of fake it till you make it, he suddenly found himself surrounded by crew members and had to quickly learn how to make a movie of this scale. He now had people like an AD, a production designer, a focus puller, but had no idea what they actually did. Cinepix's solution to this was to surround their rookie director with experienced, capable people. People like line producer Ivan Reitman, who Cronenberg claims was unceasingly supportive. Shot under the title Orgy of the Blood Parasites, Shivers opens with a commercial for Starliner Towers, an apartment complex on an island just outside of Montreal. In reality, Starliner Towers was played by a recently built condo complex on then still developing Nuns Island, which actually is in Montreal. Rolling through the credits, we see our favorite cannibal girls, Ivan Reitman and Dan Goldberg. Reitman, on top of being the producer on set looking after Cronenberg, also handled much of the music, which was all needle drop. This was before Cronenberg worked exclusively with Howard Shore, which would start with 1979's The Brood, excluding all the politics surrounding the Dead Zone. Danny Goldberg would provide the Foley and the ADR mixing. A young couple looking to rent are introduced to Merrick, the superintendent, played by Stereo and Crimes of the Future star Ronald Mlodzik. Cronenberg and Mlodzik were friends from U of T, and David was happy to give Ronald a job that would actually pay. At the same time, a young lady is being attacked in apartment 1511 by Dr. Emil Hobbs. He strangles her on the couch before making an incision in her abdomen. He pours in an acidic compound before slitting his own throat with a scalpel. There was an open casting call for Shivers, and by open I literally mean they posted a flyer in Montreal asking for anybody that wanted to be in a movie. This is where they found, among others, Montreal stage veteran Fred Doederlein for Dr. Hobbs, and Kathy Graham for Annabelle Brown, the young lady in apartment 1511. Doederlein would return for Cronenberg once more for Scanners in 1981, but Graham wouldn't be featured in anything else. In another apartment, Nick Tudor, played by Alan Coleman, credited on Shivers as Alan Mijakovsky, is trying to maintain good dental hygiene before he recoils with stomach pains. He's checked in on by his lovely wife Janine, played by Susan Petrie. He dismisses her coldly and heads out, seemingly to work. He instead takes the elevator up to apartment 1511, looking for some infidelity with the recently deceased.
Annabelle, it's Nick. You in the bedroom?
He finds her body, though not in the bedroom, and leaves, horrified. Janine is met with her friend Betts, played by Barbara Steele, to fail the Bechdel test and chat about Nick's health problems. Betts tells her to go to the Starliner Clinic and talk to Roger St. Luke, the resident doctor. Said doctor, played by Paul Hampton, has found the bodies of Annabelle and Dr. Hobbs after he was contacted to meet there for lunch. We learn that Hobbs was St. Luke's old professor, and the room receives a phone call from Hobbs' research partner, Rollo Linsky, played by Creepshow 2's Creep, Joe Silver. Rollo explains, between bites of his Montreal smoked meat sandwich and giant pickle, that Hobbs was working on a parasite that could replace malfunctioning human organs and replicate their function.
Now what do you got? You got a perfectly good parasite where you used to have a rotten kidney.
St. Luke isn't sold on the idea and bids farewell to Rollo, that son of a bitch, and returns to work. Nick returns sick from his office and becomes violently ill in his apartment. This is one of the first of many important scenes that David Cronenberg has framed in a bathroom throughout his career. From Jeff Goldblum's fingernails to Viggo Mortensen's butt. In the intimacy of the bathroom, we're all just humans. Janine visits with St. Luke about Nick's condition, and the doc agrees to visit him later that night. Nick hobbles outside for some air and vomits over the railing of his balcony onto two older ladies below. They walk away feeling sorry for the bird they think just fell on them, and we get a quick glimpse of Dr. Hobbs' parasite in the grass creeping away. This shot was actually a makeup test special effects artist Joe BLASCO did in front of his home in LA, and they told him they wouldn't keep it in the movie. It crawls into the laundry room, where this woman is washing her clothes with some bosom suds. Noticing some blood on the washer next to hers, she opens the lid, and in a very familiar shot, gets attacked by a parasite leaping out at her. She cries out in pain, but in the laundry room, no one can hear you scream. Janine returns to Betts' apartment to tell her that Dr. St. Luke is going to visit later, and the ladies make plans for dinner that evening. Without the budget to dress or construct brand new sets, the crew posted flyers in the elevator of the building they were shooting in, asking for people to donate their apartment for a few days. Many of the apartments that were featured in the film were shot as is, shag carpet and all. In fact, many of the cast and crew lived on site while they were shooting, with Cronenberg sharing a room with the special effects team. He said that the dried, sticky blood on the floor of his room would pull the shoes right off of his feet. Janine comes home to find Nick in his sickened state and puts him to bed. He whispers sweet nothings to his abdomen, and we see the parasites squirming around inside. This effect was accomplished using a fake chest, with condoms underneath being filled with air from syringes. The parasites retreat when his wife returns, and he gives her the cold shoulder once again. Special effects man Joe BLASCO was outsourced from LA. There hadn't really been many horror movies made in Canada by 1975, so the special effects makeup landscape was pretty barren. BLASCO, who had turned down both Easy Rider and Night of the Living Dead,
we make mistakes sometimes in our career,
agreed to do the film on the condition that he also got to do Barbara Steele's makeup. He recalls seeing every showing of Black Sunday for the entire opening weekend as a kid, and credits it as the movie that made him want to do makeup. Roger pores over Rollo and Hobbs' research, provided to him by Nurse Forsyth, played by Lynn Lowry. Cronenberg had seen her in George Romero's The Crazies in 1973. He chats with Rollo on the phone and learns that Hobbs wasn't trying to replace organ transplants. He actually believed humans had lost touch with their inner animal and designed the parasite to revert them as such. He also learns that the parasites can be transferred interpersonally. Roger notes that Annabelle was a, quote, popular girl, and that he already has 4 different patients complaining of abdominal problems. Rollo explains that the infected people will act erratic, and overly sexual. The two decide to meet at the tutor's apartment later, since St. Luke is going to check on Nick there anyway. Nurse Forsyth invites Roger over for dinner after work, and they engage in a battle of tongue clicks.
Okay.
Before he begrudgingly agrees. This is where things really start to kick off, as Bets is in her apartment doing her best Nancy Thompson impression. This shot of the parasite coming out of the bathtub was actually accomplished with a coat hanger and a sink drain. A delivery boy from Felipe's restaurant is attacked by the laundry lady's Tinder profile.
I'm hungry for love!
And an older couple in the hallway is attacked by a parasite on their walker. Cronenberg said that this was the most difficult shot to get in the whole film, because they kept seeing the wires on the parasite as it slid up. The parasites were designed in Joe Blasco's workshop in LA. They were made of foam latex with a spring inside for flexibility, and were manipulated on either end by fishing line. Nurse Forsyth checks on the giant roast that she's making for just her and Roger when there's a knock at the door. The man on the other side attacks her and manages to rip her dress before she fends him off with a serving fork. During this scene, David Cronenberg stood in for the attacker during the actual stabbing. They had a clay patch over the spot that she was supposed to strike, but amidst the struggle, actor Lynn Lowry missed completely and stabbed Cronenberg in the bicep. He still has a scar from it. On the next take, they made the patch bigger. She escapes down the hall and manages to catch up with Roger. They take the elevator and run into the older couple that got attacked in the hallway. The older man says he threw the parasite down the garbage chute, so Roger leaves them in Nurse Forsyth's capable hands and heads downstairs to retrieve it to study. In the basement, Roger roots through the garbage. But did somebody throw out a plate? He finds the parasite but is attacked by a maintenance man played by Sonny Forbes, who, like Fred Doderline, would return for Cronenberg in Scanners. Well, the medicine man starts seeing red. You'd think the snake just dreams up the poison in his head. Nick, now fully under the influence of the parasite, calls Janine into the bedroom and tries to make advances on her. But she isn't so much into his mouth slug, so she cries and runs out. Actor Susan Petrie couldn't cry on command, so for the scenes where Janine had to cry, she grated onions and asked Cronenberg to slap her in the face just prior to shooting. We're not talking once, we're talking 9 or 10 times and hard. Cronenberg was reluctant at first, obviously, and the crew was horrified, but eventually it just became business as usual to everyone involved. Janine runs crying to Betts' apartment, where she's met with comfort and an irresistible proposition.
Make love to me, make love to me.
2 false necks and 2 more condoms signal that Janine has joined the ranks of the sexually liberated. When they went to shoot this scene between Sue Petrie and Barbara Steele, they set up the camera and got ready to roll. Cronenberg slapped Petrie a few times to get her to start crying, and then they shot the scene. When he called cut, however, Barbara Steele, who's over 6 feet in heels, grabbed him by the collar and started screaming at him. She hadn't been present for any of the previous crying scenes and thought that he was literally abusing the actress to get the performance out of her.
Grabs me by the collar and lifts me up off the ground. She says, "I can't believe you hit that actress."
Cronenberg calmed her down by explaining that he hated doing it, but that Susan had asked him to. Steele thought to herself for a second before asking, "Do I have any crying scenes?" Nurse Forsyth works her way down to the garage looking for Roger. Because it's the 1970s, she finds an unlocked car with the keys in it and heads for the garage exit. The sensor isn't working, having been cut along with the phone lines previously, and she gets attacked by the Starliner doorman, who is now infected. Roger arrives just in time and saves her with the doorman's handgun. An infected man in the garage hears the gunshots and notices the pair attempting to escape and gets into his car. Roger backs the car up. Lynn Lowry notes that Paul Hampton was only supposed to tap the cement block. And starts to ram the door. Before he reaches it, however, they're T-boned by the infected garage patron. Roger and Forsyth limp away from the wreck and hide in a room in the basement. This is Marcel Fournier attacking the woman in the garage. The Fournier family were 4 generations of stunt people working out of Montreal. The brother who played Roger during the car crash actually smacked his head against the concrete pillar and broke his nose. They didn't wear helmets, they didn't wear seatbelts, and they both walked away from the stunt laughing with one another. Rollo Linsky arrives at Starliner Towers and heads up to Nick Tudor's apartment. Roger, of course, isn't there yet, as he has been a little preoccupied. Rollo enters Nick's bedroom and pulls the blanket back to reveal that the acidic parasites have burst through Nick's abdomen. Hold up, the leap out of the laundry machine, the acid, the chest bursting. Now, where have I seen all that before? After a special Q&A screening of Shivers in the 1980s, an attendee stood up and asked Cronenberg how he could dare make this movie when it was so obviously just a blatant ripoff of Alien. When the director revealed that the movie had in fact come out 4 years prior to Alien, the fans said, "Then we know who the thief truly is." Dan O'Bannon would later try to protest that he'd never even seen Shivers. Rollo leans in for a closer look, and when he does, a parasite attacks him. He screams and crawls around the apartment before Nick comes to and bludgeons him with a pair of slip joint pliers. Game over, man. Game over. The compound used for the acidic smoke from the parasite was titanium tetrachloride, also known as liquid smoke. During this scene, the lid of the bottle wasn't screwed on properly, and actor Joe Silver's face was accidentally covered in it. He stepped out into the hallway and violently threw up for a little while, before returning to finish the scene. Back in the basement, Nurse Forsyth delivers an iconic monologue.
That even dying is an act of eroticism.
Before she tries to slip Roger the tongue, he's having none of that, and covers her mouth before throwing her over his shoulder and heading to find a way out. After shooting this monologue, Lynn Lowry went to the ladies' room to wash off the blood. In there, she accidentally frightened 2 women that lived in the building and had to convince them that they were only shooting a movie. They head through a hall full of storage lockers before being attacked by the hormonal horde, including the Canadad himself in a cameo. Forsyth and Roger get separated, and he makes a getaway to Nick Tudor's apartment. He enters to find Rollo's dead body, with Nick kneeling over him, before blasting the insurance man in the chest with the rest of his bullets. Roger attempts an escape through the Starliner's pool, which is occupied by happy couple Janine and Betts. He works his way outside only to be stopped by a wave of infected apartment dwellers in a shot inspired by Night of the Living Dead. When he moves back inside to protect himself, the bathers pull him into the pool. Nurse Forsyth has also been doing some casual swimming, and this reveal is actor Lynn Lowry's favorite filmed shot of herself. What seems like the entirety of the building descends on him, and Nurse Forsyth rewards his prior indifference with a little tongue. The party doesn't end there, as the Starliner residents head out to the city, willing to brave the drivers of Montreal. David Cronenberg set up an early screening for Robert Fulford, editor and columnist for the influential Canadian magazine Saturday Night, as Fulford had given him a good review on stereo. Writing under the pseudonym Marshall Delaney, Fulford ferociously attacked Cronenberg's film before it was even released, in an article famously titled, "You Should Know How Bad This Film Is. After all, you paid for it." The article slammed the CFTC for allowing the use of taxpayers' money to fund the Parasite murders. He wrote, quote, "If using public money to produce films like the Parasite murders is the only way English Canada can have a film industry, then perhaps English Canada should not have a film industry." Cronenberg responded calmly, stating that there should be room for every kind of film, but Andre Link was not so friendly. He penned an open letter to Cinema Canada, basically calling Fulford un-Canadian, and blaming people like him for the reason that so many Canadian filmmakers head south for work. It was released in Canada under the title The Parasite Murders, and when it performed well in Montreal as Frisson, the title was changed yet again to Shivers for the worldwide release, except in America where they called it They Came From Within. On top of the name change, the Motion Picture Association of America also made a few cuts to the film to prevent it from receiving an X rating. But hey, maybe if it had gotten an X, Cinepix could have distributed it as one of their nudie cuties. Evidently, not everyone regarded Shivers in the same manner as Fulford. Cinema Canada said with love that it could have been Canada's The Exorcist, and Take One had it in their top 10 for 1975. After all was said and done, the movie returned $5 million on its $180,000 budget. The CFTC was hesitant at first to fund Cronenberg's work again, but Shivers was both the fastest recouping and most successful film they had ever funded at that time. So 2 years later, he was in the director's chair once again. John Grierson couldn't stop David Cronenberg's filmmaking of the imagination, and neither could Robert Fulford. Until next time, I've been RJ, this has been Killer Canuck, and thanks for watching. Hey folks, RJ here. Thanks for watching this episode of Killer Canuck. I want to give a huge thanks to the folks at RUE MORGUE for hosting this series on their channel. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RealKillerCanuck. If you like the tune playing in the background, be sure to check out Prodigy on SoundCloud and over at noiserecords.com. There'll be a link in the description below. Let me know what Canadian horror films you think I should cover. Until next time.